They called me into the conference room at 9:02 a.m. No eye contact, no pleasantries, just a folder, a forced smile, and the sentence I'd replay in my mind 100 times since. I'm afraid your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately. 15 years? 15 years of staying late, fixing mistakes I didn't make, remembering everyone's birthdays, and showing up even when my back felt like it was splitting in two. And now, I was being erased like I never existed. I looked at Emily, our new CEO, barely in her 30s, sitting across from me with her arms folded, her expression cold and professional. Next to her, Chloe, her favorite assistant, smirked like she'd just won a bet. They expected me to cry, to beg, to crumble, but I didn't, because what they didn't know was I had seen this coming, and I was ready. I had been quietly preparing for this exact moment for weeks. Every document, every email, every recording, neatly organized, ready to be unleashed. What they thought was the end for me was only the beginning of their reckoning. So I signed the termination papers with a smile. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and said the only words I knew would haunt them later. Thank you. This was very helpful. Have you ever been pushed out like you were nothing, only to prove later you were everything? Keep watching. You're not going to believe what happened next. When I first started at the firm, we were barely 20 people crammed into a shoebox office above a dry cleaner. The copy machine jammed every other hour. The AC barely worked in the summer, and we had to share one coffee pot that sputtered more than it brewed. But I loved it. Back then, our founder, Richard Dawson, still ran the place. He believed in handshakes, loyalty, and treating every employee like family. I was hired as an office administrator, but within a year, I was doing everything from project budgets to organizing client dinners. Richard once told me, "You're the glue. Marion, without you, we'd fall apart." And I believed him. For years, I poured myself into that place. When my husband passed away suddenly from a heart attack, it was Richard who gave me paid time off, no questions asked, and sent flowers to the funeral with a handwritten note. I came back a week later, and the team welcomed me with open arms. It wasn't just a job, it was home. I watched the company grow, one project at a time. We moved to a sleek high-rise downtown. We landed million-dollar clients. The team tripled in size. But even as the carpets got thicker and the boardrooms got bigger, I never lost my sense of duty. I kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. They called me the office brain. Everyone, from interns to senior partners, came to me when things got messy. I knew the vendors, the contracts, the old file archives, even the clients' birthdays. When someone messed up a report or forgot a deadline, I'd quietly step in and fix it. I wasn't flashy. I didn't climb any ladders. But I was steady, dependable, the one person who remembered how this company was built. But when Richard retired 2 years ago and handed the reins to his daughter Emily, everything started to change. Emily was sharp. No doubt about that. MBA from Stanford. Fast talking. Always impeccably dressed. But she had a different energy. Cool. Calculated. Corporate. The warmth was gone. She replaced Richard's framed family photo in the lobby with a brushed steel company mission statement. She spoke in buzzwords and carried a tablet instead of a notebook. Still, I gave her a fair chance. I stayed late to help her get settled, showed her how things really worked beyond the spreadsheets, and offered quiet support when she stumbled through her first client presentation. I even defended her when others whispered about her being too green or too cold. But Emily didn't want guidance. She wanted control. She brought in her own people, young, hungry, tech-savvy. One of them was Chloe, a 24-year-old with a killer wardrobe and a knack for charming executives. Chloe quickly became Emily's shadow, and suddenly, I wasn't being invited to team meetings anymore. My weekly report requests went unanswered. Projects I'd managed for years were quietly reassigned. At first, I brushed it off, They're just restructuring. I told myself. New leadership. New rhythm. But then came the real signs. One morning, I noticed my access to the internal database had been downgraded. When I asked IT about it, they said, "Oh, Chloe's handling that now." When I submitted a revised budget plan, one that saved the company $12,000 over 6 months, it was returned to me with a curt note. Not necessary. No feedback. No thanks. And the worst? They moved my desk. After a decade of sitting near the executive suite, I was relocated to a back corner by the supply closet. No explanation. Just a "we're optimizing space" email. It stung. I went home that night and cried, not because I lost the seat, but because I knew what it symbolized. I was being quietly erased. But something happened after that. As I sat at my kitchen table that evening, staring at my untouched dinner, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. They thought I was just an old file in a dusty drawer, but what they didn't realize was I knew everything. I knew which client accounts were nearing expiration. I knew which vendors had backdoor deals. I knew how many times Chloe had accidentally billed hours to the wrong project. I even knew about the offshore account Emily opened in the company's name. Because I had processed the wire confirmation months ago, and that's when I began documenting. I wasn't reckless. I didn't storm into offices or send angry emails. I simply watched, listened, and recorded every policy violation, every inappropriate comment, every moment of age-based exclusion. It was like building a case, brick by brick, and all the while, I smiled, brought cookies to meetings, and kept my voice calm. Because I wasn't planning revenge, I was preparing a reckoning. And the best part? They never saw it coming. The official blow came on a Tuesday. A calendar invite popped up on my screen at 8:45 a.m. Meeting with HR, 9 a.m. Conference Room B. No subject line, no context. But I already knew. I walked to the room with my head high and my heart strangely calm. The same calm you feel not when you're surprised, but when you've already prepared the ground beneath your feet. Inside sat Emily, flanked by Chloe, and a representative from HR named Patrick, a man who barely made eye contact with me. Emily started with a sigh. "Marion, we appreciate your service to this company, but we're restructuring to remain competitive. Your position has been made redundant. Redundant, like a printer that doesn't connect to Wi-Fi, like a policy that no one reads, like 15 years of loyalty meant nothing." Chloe didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. She crossed her legs, hands folded, that irritating half-smile on her face. I could almost hear her thinking, "We finally got rid of her." Patrick slid an envelope toward me. "There's a severance package included," he said quickly. "We need you to sign this and return your access badge by end of day." I opened it slowly. 1 month of pay, no stock options, no bonus. They were clearly banking on me being too shocked to fight back, but I wasn't shocked. I was ready. I looked up, locked eyes with Emily, and said simply, "Thank you. This was very helpful." Then I walked out. No tears, no scene, but the storm was already forming behind my smile. That afternoon, I made 3 calls. First, to my employment lawyer, Ms. Sharon Clark, a sharp and seasoned woman who had been helping me document everything for the last 2 months. Second, to the Department of Labor. And third, to an investigative journalist named Dana Linwood, someone I met years ago through a local business networking event. She owed me a favor. You see? I had pieced together something bigger than a simple wrongful termination. It started with Chloe mischarging hours, padding invoices to inflate billable work. Then I uncovered a trail of falsified client reports when I flagged them to Emily weeks before. She told me to let it go. That was a red flag. But the final straw? I discovered a $250,000 vendor contract that Emily had personally approved, sent to a shell company with no clear business function. The contract had been masked as a consulting expense, but the address traced back to a condo Emily's boyfriend owned. I printed everything. I had timestamps, approval chains, email correspondence, and I was sitting on it like a lit match waiting for dry timber. 2 weeks after my termination, I filed a formal complaint through my attorney. The claim? Unlawful termination due to age discrimination, retaliation after reporting internal fraud, denial of earned retirement stock benefits. The company, of course, denied all wrongdoing. Emily called it a baseless attack from a disgruntled former employee, but they underestimated how deeply I'd planned. Because I wasn't just building a legal case, I had also started talking to former employees, vendors, even clients who'd left without explanation, and the picture was ugly. Emily had created a culture of fear, favoritism, and manipulation. Chloe acted as her gatekeeper, screening information, redirecting blame, and subtly pressuring older employees to resign. Several others had also been restructured out, each one over the age of 50, when my story hit the local business blog. Thanks to Dana, things began to unravel. Anonymous sources came forward. Whistleblowers within the company began leaking documents. An internal audit was triggered. Then the board of directors stepped in. Turns out, they weren't aware of the fraud, nor the legal exposure Emily was creating. And when they saw the evidence I'd been sitting on, including a recording of Chloe mocking my age during a staff meeting, they were livid. The HR rep who had been complicit, fired. Chloe, suspended pending investigation. Emily, put on indefinite leave, then quietly removed from her position a month later. The public statement read, Ms. Dawson has chosen to pursue other professional opportunities. But we all knew what that meant. As for me, I didn't return to that company. I didn't want to, but I did win. The settlement covered my full severance, stock options, legal fees, and included a formal apology letter, which I framed and tucked behind a plant on my windowsill. But the real win? Knowing I didn't let them erase me. I didn't scream. I didn't crumble. I simply documented, waited, and moved when the time was right. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just quiet justice. And that's the kind that echoes longest. About a month after my lawsuit was filed and the internal investigation began, the silence from the company turned tense. Emails stopped. Calls were rerouted. The company's LinkedIn page went unusually quiet. I knew exactly what was happening. Damage control. But I had no intention of going quietly. By this point, I wasn't just pursuing justice for myself. I had become the voice for others who had been pushed out, overlooked, or discarded simply for being too seasoned in a workplace obsessed with youth and speed. One afternoon, I received a call from a familiar voice. Marion, it's Richard. Can we meet? It took me a second to process. Richard Dawson, the founder, the man who once led with integrity, had been quietly watching from retirement over coffee. He got right to the point. I read everything. Dana sent me the article. I also got a call from the board. I had no idea things had gotten this bad under Emily's leadership. His voice cracked slightly. I could see it pained him, not just as a father, but as someone who had built something with care, only to watch it rot from the inside. I made a mistake. Marion, he said, and I need your help to fix it. Turns out, Richard still held a minor stake in the company and had influence with a few board members, especially the older ones who remembered the firm's humble beginnings and remembered me. I shared with him the documents I had collected, the financial trail leading to the fraudulent vendor payouts, and even the testimonies of 2 ex-employees who had contacted me privately with similar age discrimination claims. He didn't say much, just nodded, took the folder, and promised, "This won't be swept under the rug." A week later, I received a formal invitation to attend a closed board hearing, not as an accuser, as a witness. The board had called for an emergency session. Emily and Chloe were required to appear and defend their actions before a panel of legal, financial, and HR experts. I walked into the conference room, the same one where they'd blindsided me weeks earlier, but this time, everything was different. This time, I wasn't the one on trial. Emily sat across from me, her expression stone cold. Her once confident posture had stiffened. Chloe looked pale, eyes darting, fingers fidgeting with a pen. I was calm. I laid everything out, piece by piece. The manipulated vendor contracts, the ageist messages Chloe sent internally, the suspicious bonus payout schedule that coincided exactly with employee terminations, right before stock vesting dates, and the kicker, Emily's own voice, from a recorded meeting, saying, "We need fresh blood. The old guard needs to go, even if we have to accelerate the process." There was silence in the room after that. Then one board member asked, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I answered honestly, because I hoped I was wrong, because I wanted to believe this company still stood for what Richard built, and frankly, because I was afraid, until I realized silence was exactly what they were counting on. The fallout was swift. Emily was officially terminated for cause, which meant no golden parachute, no severance, no soft exit. Chloe's contract was dissolved pending further investigation, and the company issued a public memo acknowledging systemic failures in leadership and culture. But it didn't stop there. My lawyer and I negotiated a landmark settlement that included not only financial restitution for me, but also a commitment from the company to implement anti-discrimination retraining, whistleblower protection policies, and a mentorship program pairing older employees with rising stars, valuing experience as a competitive edge, not a liability. They even asked me if I'd consider returning in a consulting role. I declined, not because I was bitter, but because I had found something greater than my old desk and title. I had found my voice. The media picked up the story. From erased to empowered, one woman's fight against ageism in corporate America. It went viral, especially among women in their 50s and 60s who had similar stories. My inbox was flooded with messages. "I was pushed out after 20 years. Thank you for speaking up. Your story gave me the courage to file my own complaint. I thought it was just me. It's not." And that's when the second twist happened. A former client, now CEO of a mid-sized consultancy firm, reached out. "Marion, we saw what you did. We're building a new kind of company, one that values wisdom and resilience. We need someone like you." 2 months later, I walked into my new office, senior operations consultant, flexible hours, full benefits, and the authority to help shape not just a company, but a culture. The greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became unignorable. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth. And that was more powerful than any outburst or outcry could have ever been. Sometimes, winning looks like a lawsuit. Sometimes, it's walking out with your dignity. But sometimes, it's being invited back in, but through a different door, with your head held even higher. I still remember the day I boxed up my things from the old office. Not the day they fired me, but a few weeks later, when I returned under very different circumstances. By then, the lawsuit had been settled. Emily was gone. Chloe had disappeared into the HR files like a bad rumor, and the board had offered me the chance to collect my personal belongings with full dignity and no time limit. So I walked in, not as the redundant employee they tried to erase, but as the woman who reminded them that loyalty isn't weakness, and age isn't incompetence. I moved slowly, carefully, my favorite mug, a framed photo of my late husband, smiling beside me at the office Christmas party, a plant that had somehow survived 3 winters and 1 broken radiator, and a paperweight Richard once gave me that read, "The ones who remember are the ones who rebuild." I stood there for a long moment, looking around. I expected to feel bitterness, but what surprised me was how light I felt. I didn't need this office anymore, because I had something far greater now. I had rebuilt myself. In the months that followed, my life changed in ways I never expected. I accepted the consulting role at the new firm. The difference in culture was night and day. There were no games, no whispers behind closed doors, just smart, good people doing meaningful work and valuing every voice at the table. One of the junior analysts, a bright young woman named Tasha, told me during a coffee break, You make me feel like I can be both successful and still kind. Like I don't have to become cold to survive in this world. That moment meant more to me than any bonus I'd ever received. I also began speaking publicly, first at women's leadership forums, then corporate HR conferences. My topic? The hidden cost of throwing away experience. I shared my story not with anger, but with clarity, with strategy. And I saw how it landed, not just with older employees, but with young professionals too. Because deep down, we all fear being overlooked, being replaced, being seen as less than when we've actually become more through time. But here's the thing. The world only forgets you when you let it. And I chose not to. If you're watching this right now and you've ever felt invisible, if you've been loyal to a company, a person, or a dream, only to be tossed aside like none of it mattered, let me say something to you that no one said to me when I needed it most. You still matter. You're not behind. You're not done. In fact, you might be right at the beginning of your next chapter. All those years you think went to waste? They didn't. They built you. They sharpened your instincts, deepened your patience, and trained your eyes to see what others miss. So when the day comes that someone underestimates you, don't break. Prepare, document, observe, wait, and then rise. Not with vengeance, with vision, not with rage, with results. Because the sweetest revenge is not screaming, "You'll regret this." It's watching them quietly realize they already do. Now, I want to leave you with this. What if the moment you thought was your greatest failure was actually just your entrance cue? Think about that. Because I did, and I walked through the next door stronger, smarter, and freer than I had ever been. If this story touched something in you, share it. If you've been there, comment below. Tell me your story. I read everyone. And if you believe in resilience, in rising up without losing your soul, subscribe, because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell truths that shake the ground beneath injustice. We remind each other, you are not alone. You are not done. You are not invisible. You're just getting started.